Salam, welcome to this bi-weekly special program on Satit Media. Today, as usual, I have Engineer Suleiman Adam Hussein to talk about the Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki's two-part interview with the state-run media. Suleiman, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Abdul.
Um, it's always a pleasure. Today, we're going to discuss about the two-part interview that the Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki did on July 19th, and then the following was on July 23rd. So the interview was very wide range, but we're going to focus just on regional and global issues for today. So to start off, you watched the interview, I believe. So what's your take, especially when the president was talking about the region, the global influence, the dependency on aid, and then at some point he said whatever the new U.S. government, maybe not new, but the Trump administration is doing regarding the U.S. aid is a blessing in disguise. That's what he said. So, what's your take in general?
My general take the interview is the depths he showed in linking domestic issues with regional and global issues. It all boils down to one thing, in my view, whether you call it global, whether you call it regional or domestic, for that matter. It all boils down to how the Eritrea's trajectory since independence, and not also since independence, but also since the end of World War II, when it was expected at the end of Italian colonization to exercise its right to self-determination as enshrined in the United Nations Charter, how all this was curtailed by the competition of global powers, by the how do you call it, the world order that came after the end of World War II, and also that made Eritrea go the long way and pay huge sacrifices to exercise its right of self-determination that it was denied from back in the 1940s or early 50s. It had to go for a 50-year-old political and armed struggle to regain that right of self-determination, which culminated in Eritrean independence in 1991. That's from one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the same geopolitical factors also to a great extent shaped the post-independence era of Eritrea since 1991. Apart from the first few years, like 5 to 7 years after 1991, when Eritrea enjoyed relatively relative peace and its economy started growing. I think, if I remember the figures well, somewhere between 8 to 10% annually, and it was expected to become the new economic miracle in Africa. But unfortunately, those same old geopolitical considerations made Eritrea spend the rest of the years after 1997 in defending the hard-won independence, its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity, and all this at the cost of improving its economy, at the cost of improving the livelihood of its citizens, at the cost of um, also uh, building the national institutions that would normally come once the country is independent. It means the national institutions that help uh, ensure the the future of the country, the political participation of citizens, and provide the legal framework for its developmental strategy and so on and so forth. So what I understood from this interview is to what extent all these factors, although they come under different titles, but to what extent they are interlinked, and to what extent they have shaped the the modern history of Eritrea, and they still do, by the way, although things look better now than they have been in the last 30 plus years, but still these factors are relevant to the whatever we have or we wish to have in Eritrea. So we cannot evaluate the post-independence trajectory of Eritrea without also considering all these factors. Unfortunately, Eritrea, uh, fortunately or unfortunately, it goes both ways, by the way. Eritrea is located at a very strategically important, highly strategically important part of the world, one of the most strategically important places on this planet, on the southern part of the Red Sea, and also on the Bab el Mandeb, which is one of the very important waterways that's important for the world economy and also security. So the great powers have always wanted to dominate this area, and they do so by outsourcing the agenda to local allies, we call them, or we call them also satellite states that are there to implement the agenda of the global powers. So this being the case, things look different as we speak, and that's what I understood. And I also understood that the economic development strategies of the state of Eritrea, by and large, although they have been there even during the years of national security threats, but they have been there. Eritrea has achieved also considerably in those aspects, but not it did not use its full potential. But this time, it looks like on the order of priorities, the economic development has come at the forefront of the national agendas, while the national security issues were still there, but no more number one agenda, but rather number two, and economic factors number two, number one. So the future looks much better, but still there are challenges ahead. This is the general take.
Thank you. So, as I said in the introduction, the president's interview was very wide range, but we're gonna focus just on the topics or issues that he touched on regarding the entire African continent and particularly the Horn of Africa region. So let me start. Let me zoom out and look at the issues that he raised about the continent itself. So he said the other continent has 60% of the global natural resources. The continent is still unable to use those. Instead, uh, Western companies extract the natural resources and take it home. It could be French, United States, wherever, and send it back to Africa with huge price tag. It seems though um, he suggested that African nations should be able to produce uh, should able to export value added products instead of raw material. How, how do you think Africans can achieve that?
Uh, no one would suggest that it would be easy, because the overall world economic order is designed in such a way that the West will always dominate, and
Manipulative.
Africa and the likes would only serve as a source of natural resources and not manufacturing. So the challenges are not easy, but if Africans stand together and realize that, looking backward, the last 6 years since African states became independent nations, uh, very few or probably none of African countries have achieved
Mm,
any meaningful progress. In fact, it is in many ways it's the other way around. I read somewhere that Africa, when it was colonized back before the Second World War, it used to produce enough of its food products, and it was exporting actually food products to the West. Now, the food security is a big challenge for Africa itself, let alone to export. African states don't have enough, they don't produce enough food. This is because the world economic order and the financial institutions that were created, dominated by the West, and also created to maintain that situation across the globe, and ensure the Western countries' continued domination of global affairs. So they were also designed to discourage the nation countries
mm,
in producing food products, but rather, because their economy is by and large based on agriculture, they were more pushed towards producing cash crops. Uh, okay. Uh, these cash crops are sold in world markets by peanuts, but they serve the industrialized countries.
mm.
Whatever they get from the cash crops they export, whether it is cotton or seeds,
Diamond.
to, similar, the money that they get is not enough to buy enough food for the population. So that's why a continent that was at one point self-sufficient in terms of food, now
Independent.
yes, suffer from food security. And yes, he did say that Africa is, I would say, the richest continent, probably, in terms of natural resources, at least. Not only that, but also it's a very young continent, meaning that the majority of its population are very young, which is also vital for economy. But because of the general architecture that is imposed on globally, has made it very difficult, if not impossible, these countries to have a meaningful development of their countries. Now, what is the solution? The solution is, before I come to the solution, I'll give you just one example, if I may. For example, I was reading somewhere about Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire produces huge amounts of cacao.
Cacao.
It's used for the production of chocolates. Uh, so Cote d'Ivoire gets peanuts by exporting tons of
Cacao.
cacao, and in tons actually, but the chocolates that are produced in Western countries, such as Switzerland, Belgium, and other countries, is exported in grams like gold, and then and they bring billions and billions to those countries. Another example, quick example, is one from Sudan. Sudan during the British colonization, its agriculture was more tuned towards producing cotton. Uh, Cotton that's necessary for the textile industry of the old British Empire. Now, the Sudanese women, they have this dress, traditional dress called the top. Uh, and actually, the best top in the market in Sudan is the top that comes from England and is made from the Sudanese cotton. So when they export cotton in tons, they get peanuts, but the top that comes from London is called the English top is one of the most expensive, and so this shows the the real problem behind the cash crops and a country's free choice to invest in whatever sector of the um, agricultural
Mhm.
service the needs of that country. Now, can this situation be sustained? No one would say yes. It would not be sustained, which is why we are seeing political and social upheavals across the continent, and we are seeing migration in their hundreds of thousands. So the best solution would be if these countries use the resources for their own people, for their own economic development, and that can only be done if value is added onto those natural resources, and at which point the country exporting those resources would get enough funds, enough cash to fund other national projects such as infrastructure, educational system, national institutions, health institutions, and so on and so forth. But now the problem is what they get does not cover what they need, and so they are loan trapped because to fill the gap they are forced to are encouraged and forced to take loans from those same institutions, okay? And at the end of the day, those institutions, like we can say, remotely control the country's path to development, the country's politics, the country's foreign policy, and even internal policy, and even internal political
Dynamics.
dynamics of the country falls under the control of those countries and their institutions like such as the IMF and the world. So now, how do we get out of this cycle of poverty that is dangerously increasing across the continent by changing the terms of engagement with the rest of the world? And a single country may not be able to do that by itself, and if it does, it would pay huge prices. Case in point is Eritrea and few other countries in on this planet. But if these countries realize the root cause of the underdevelopment and the poverty they are suffering for lies precisely in accepting the the unfair world economic order and also the political order that is there to protect it. If they come together in solidarity, I think they may turn the tide to their advantage, because Western countries will still need the natural resources coming from Africa and elsewhere, and because their industry need that, and so they will have at some point accept new terms to deal with these countries on new terms that are favorable to to the producing countries, and also on terms that are mutually beneficial. Because at the point, at the moment, they are only beneficial to those who import, not to those who export. But at some point, this has to change, and we have to come to an arrangement that is mutually beneficial. I think this is what was meant, and this is what should be done in the future.
Thank you, engineer. Thank you for those who are engaging. We really appreciate the engagement, the comment, and the encouragement. I see one of the main YouTubers here, George Drar. Thank you, George. Indeed, if you think about the current situation of Africa in comparison to the natural resources that the continent has, there's no words to describe that. There's no, I cannot explain the agony and the issue, that the problems that Africa has. For example, you mentioned cacao. I think that being used like in a lot of examples. I also use the diamonds. So let's say the companies, the Belgian companies or other companies that mine diamond in DRC, probably they buy the diamond very cheap, but when they sell the diamond back to the customer, to the Africans, to even like to the rest of the world, it's super expensive. The wedding ring or the engagement ring is very expensive, and gold at the same time. Now, the president mentioned the dependency of the African continent.
But before we go to the President, Abdul, if I may,
Sure.
yes, the examples you mentioned are quite important, and I believe the list can go on and go on. It's a very long list. We just for the purpose of this argument, we can mention the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I believe, if it's not the richest on this planet, is one of the richest. And one would only need to switch on the TV to see in what conditions is DRC. Not only it's not able to use its own resources, whether it's gold or other precious minerals, but also how this country's politics is manipulated, and citizens of that country are not even able to live peacefully in their countries. And there are areas that are controlled by gangs that operate on behalf of big multinationals, and the rest is history. Another example is Somalia. One striking example about Somalia, I don't want to take your time about this, but I think many years ago when the civil war in Somalia was at its worst, we were seeing daily footages of fighting between militias that would make anyone watching the TV say, what kind of people are there in that country to kill each other this way. But an interesting thing in this is an Italian investigative journalist came up with a different story about what was going on in Somalia. Okay, and he went beyond the actual fighting between the armed militias, and his investigation took a few months, but actually he broadcasted a very, very interesting reportage that was broadcast on Italian TVs at the time. This was back in the 1990s, I remember, because I watched that. And actually, if I remember well his words, he was saying, one would think that Somalis are fighting each other just because we don't know what is behind that fighting. Okay, most of those fighting were around, in and around uh, banana plantation areas in Somalia, and everyone knows that the Somali banana is one of the best in the world, and it's one of the most important natural resources of Somalia. So one militia was financed by an Italian multinational, which through those militias was trying to continue uh, to um, to control the export of banana, and the other militia was funded and guided by an American multinational, which was also attempting to control those banana plantations and export banana to the world.
Mm.
So the civil, what we look like, or what we see like a civil war in one part of Africa, this is not to say we Africans are not should not take the blame for what goes on, but also there are factors that are related to what we were talking about, the general world order that is making it difficult for African states to rise up to the challenge. So the multinationalists who hide behind armed gangs were the ones who were fueling, financing the fight, and the price was paid by ordinary Somali citizens.
Mm. Uh, Companies that mine in DRC, like Glencore, Ivanhoe Mines, Barrick Gold, those they mine the natural resources from Congo, for example. We use in Congo because of what's going on currently in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I remember back in December, Congo was suing Apple, the company that produces iPhones, iMacs, and iPads. So they were sued, and soon, within few days, the Congo civil war erupted. So that this can tell you how interconnected those companies with um, those local militias are. Another thing that President Isaias Afwerki in his interview mentioned was the dependency of the African continent onto aid from the Western countries. It seems so now with the closure of US aid, uh, there are a lot of issues in Africa because many countries were dependent on it, on the aid. How can Africa break out of this dependency? Uh, because if we look at Africa in a broader way, there is no like manufacturing hubs in Africa that can handle uh, like mass production. So how can the continent be freed or break the dependency on aid? What can be done?
I think they can. Okay. Number one, they have to realize that the root of the problem is dependency. The root of cause for their underdevelopment um, is the continued domination of the industrialized world. And look, let's put the question in a different way. What did those countries that get millions of financial aid per year achieve? Nothing. In fact, those funds only make sure that governments in those countries are obedient to Western countries and cannot do whatever is not to the liking of the funders. So if you don't control, you don't immobilize your own resources and you don't control your economic policies and make them in line with your national needs, there is no way you can break from the cycle of poverty. Now, because the pressure is so huge from the Western industrialized countries that would do everything they can to maintain the status quo across the globe, and they would demonize and punish every country that tries to say, no, I have my own way. But the answer to that would be uh, to do that in solidarity. Okay, if the African country, if we talk about Africa now, although the same is true to the rest of the underdeveloped world, but because we are more focused on Africa, if we talk about Africa, if these African countries, instead of serving Western agenda and fighting each other, if they complement each other and stand together in solidarity, that pressure would not be there anymore. If it would be there, it would be less, and new terms of engagement between the industrialized world and the underdeveloped world would necessarily emerge, because life has to continue on those industries in the West are not simply going to shut and go home. They would need those resources. If they get them in their own terms, that's well and good for them. If they don't, they will have to negotiate to get them under different terms. And that's how these countries can get enough money from their exporters and use that money to fund their national projects, which means they will not be in need of foreign aid, because many countries simply don't have enough money to pay their employees, let alone fund projects, which is why they run to the IMF or to the donor countries to get that money. But that money comes with chains, and this is what's going on. So I think the answer to this, in my view, lies in many things. But if I mention two, one is the realization that this is the root cause of the poverty in Africa, and the need to stand together in solidarity and have a collective approach in dealing with external. I'm not saying to have a fight with the West or East, because people have to interact and exchange trade, but those terms that are unfavorable to Africa must be renegotiated, and one country alone cannot do that. But if the 54 countries stand together and they are firm and they stand, there is no reason why the pragmatic West that we know would not accept the new terms, because they would need Africa at the end.
Okay. Before I zoom in into the Horn of African region, I'd like to bring something to your attention. One of the things that the president said in his interview was regarding the dependency, or regarding the foreign aid. He put it in a very strong term. What he said was to rely on aid instead of working, producing, or utilizing one's resources to achieve higher standard of living is, in effect, a modern form of slavery. Now, how can all Africans, from north to south, from east to west, can realize this reality? What can be done to realize that, in effect, Africa is under a modern slavery?
I think we had so many years to realize, but we haven't. But the way things are going would have already made us, as Africans, I'm talking, made us learn the hard way. Because Africa in general, I'm not saying every single country is, but generally speaking, Africa is in tatters. The economy is more or less non-existent, or totally dependent on foreign powers. Nothing good has happened. There are not even enough infrastructure to link the countries among themselves to encourage trade, interstate trade across Africa, and so many things. Today, it's easier to fly from Addis to Rome and London and go to another African capital than to fly directly to from one capital to another. So everything is designed to keep the status quo. Now, because we are learning the hard way, now what we need is the political will and the readiness to pay. Then, if we have paid the price for the last of poverty for the last 6 years, there is no reason why we should not pay the price that comes out of insisting on our independence for a few years, because that will not be as long as the years that followed the end of the World War. I'm saying this because there will be a price. It won't be easy, but we have to be able also to maintain solidarity and be ready to pay the
The price.
the price, at least in short term, but the long term would be in the favor of those who own the resources, not those who buy the resources. And another point, the world itself is changing. So, from unipolar world is gradually changing to multipolar world, and they are not all in agreement about how to trade with Africa. So this also opens a new opportunity for Africa to decide who to deal with. If one side is not willing to accept new terms, okay, it would not mean that those natural resources would not be sold in the global market, because there will be somebody else who would need them, and because the world is multipolar, and there is no single power that's dominating, that will be dominating in the I hope in the near future the planet. So this also gives another opportunity or a room of maneuver to these African states. Anyway, even if it's not easy, we would have less to pay by insisting on independence than by continuing the status quo that's taken us to more chaos and more poverty and more fighting. So the choice is onto the intelligentsia of the African continent, the intellectuals, the politicians, especially those who are in power. It is high time that they realize. It's high time they realize this situation in Africa will not be sustainable anymore.
Again, before I jump into the issues pertaining Horn of Africa, I want to mention two things from what the president said in his interview. One is institutions. Africa should be able to establish sovereign institutions. Though he said some of the regional institutions are not functional or dead, like, for example, IGAD, Intergovernmental, whatever the acronym is. Another thing he said was about the terrorism. So he mentioned countries that are known for terrorism on their headlines. I'm not saying that those terrorism is real or not real, but in the headlines, when you read about Niger, Mali, or Central Africa, whatever you hear is linked to terrorism. So what he says, whether it is in Niger, Mali, Nigeria, or Somalia, the same patterns repeat where the narrative of incipient terrorism is invoked to justify external interventions. So, for example, we have French in some of the countries in Mali, for example, or Niger. Now, though they left, they were there because they're terrorism. So, is terrorism in Africa really manufactured or an issue? I think this question should be answered by all Africans. But how can security questions or issues related to security can be handled by Africans instead of calling for help from, it could be from Russia. We have the Wagner Group in Africa, or from French or from United States. Instead of calling those companies or organizations to help, how can Africans handle their internal security issues?
I wouldn't go as far as calling all phenomena of terrorism as fabricated, but I can confidently say that much of it is fabricated. And the term itself has been abused because Western countries use that term to promote their agenda, not to fight terrorism. Let's take one example. Somalia. There is no doubt that Al Shabaab has carried out many terrorist
Heinous activities, yeah.
activities or terrorist acts in Somalia and elsewhere in the neighboring countries, including Uganda and Kenya. But having said that, who created Al Shabaab and who uses Al Shabaab to promote its own agenda? I think the answer we all know it. It's a country called Ethiopia, which uses Western funds in the name of fighting Al Shabaab, that creates and finances or created the conditions that would lead to the emergence of an organization such as Al Shabaab. But if we take it further, I was recently watching a video clip from the, I think it's Senate subcommittee hearing when I think a CIA officer was giving evidence in front of a subcommittee of the Senate. I don't remember whether it was foreign relations, which I believe so, but not so sure. And he was actually admitting that the CIA was funding in millions the Al Shabaab, the Al Qaeda, and the Taliban. So the same terms that we use to invade countries and to create instability. So that term although it's a very bad thing to have terrorism, but the Western countries went to the extent of creating terrorism when it serves their agenda, and fighting a country in the name of terrorism when it also helps its agenda. Now, back to the question, how can the Africans have a collective security
Response.
or architecture? I wouldn't I wouldn't go as far as saying that this is possible in the immediate future, because we have to be realists, and we know the degree of involvement of Western countries in the continent. But there is still room to change with small unities, such as subcontinental organizations, countries who understand their needs and their problems better when they work with each other. These countries, this system can gradually evolve into the continental scale, because Rome was not built in one day, and to achieve the collective African security, I think we have to go through the ladder, and there is no lift towards that. There is only stairs, so we have to go up the stairs one after one. Let's start with
the bottom one.
Organizations, strengthen those regional organizations, and that will have an impact on the rest of the continent, and so on and so forth. But just to mention the example that you referred to about Niger, it's actually very, very odd to see that the amount of uranium Niger produces per year is enough to take Niger out of poverty. I'm not saying that natural resources by themselves are enough. You need institutions, you need policies, but those resources are huge. But what Niger uses to get from those resources are peanuts, and the French would sell them in huge prices. A country such as France that does not produce a single gram of gold has one of the the highest reserves of gold in the world. So we can mention Ghana and many other countries who are very rich in natural resources, but still very poor. So the road will be rocky. It's not easy, but it's not impossible.
Okay. Uh, there are a lot of questions that can be asked in relation to the greater Africa as a continent, but let's zoom in into the region according based on the interview that the state media conducted with Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. Recently, in the past 3 4 months, there have been headlines on internet. Um, those headlines paint a very bleak picture of the region. They warn about war that could, they say, war could be break out between Eritrea and Ethiopia any minute, any day, any hour. Regarding that, the president said something. What do you make of that? I'm sure a lot of analysts took it different ways, but as a analyst of the regional issues and you have abundant knowledge of the regional history. So, what do you make of what the president said about the possibility of war between Eritrea and Ethiopia?
Um, I can only start by saying there are no reasons uh, either for Ethiopia or for Eritrea to go to war at this point. Uh, let's identify what are the issues that are used to promote the agenda of war. It's lack of access to the sea by the Ethiopians. Is it true? Is Ethiopia denied access? If history made Ethiopia a landlocked country, that's no one is um,
Well,
there's no one to blame except history. Uh, but an international law gives the right to landlocked countries to access the sea by entering into agreement with coastal states, which the Ethiopia is doing at the moment with Djibouti and to some extent with Somalia and to some extent with Sudan before the civil war broke out. Ethiopia used to import uh, petroleum through Port Sudan. Now, the fallacy number one, it's not true that Ethiopia is denied access to the sea. If that's not the case, then what does it want? Ethiopia wants sovereign access to the sea. But how can a landlocked country have a sovereign access to the sea if it is not by conquering and using force? Is this not does it not make the world a jungle? Is there no international law? Is Ethiopia not a member of the international community? Is not a member of the United Nations? Is not a founding member of the African Union? How can a threat to take a seaport belonging to another sovereign country? This is madness. Now, the next question that comes: who is encouraging them if it is so obvious that this is illegal and nearly impossible? And who is encouraging Ethiopia to go this far in challenging all the international norms? Now we would come to what the president says, and to some extent also we have been saying that for the last year or so, even though not in English in your program, we mentioned that sometimes many times. Now there are regional mini superpowers that have decided that they should control the sea coast, whether it's the Indian Ocean or the Red up to the Canal Suez. And I don't know why, but they have this madness of wanting to to
Hmm.
have control uh, over each and every seaport on, on, on this coast that extends from other Kenya or Tanzania out to Egypt, and is coming into collision course with each and every country in this area, except the 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 failed state of Somalia, of which the breakaway region is allowing the UAE to have that full control. But every other sovereign country has resisted this temptation and has entered into crisis with the UAE. Now, what does the UAE want? Why does the UAE has this much influence on Ethiopia? Why have the Ethiopian ruling elite have lost their mind and endanger their own country and the whole area just to fulfill the agenda of another
Country.
uh, I think that this will take us back to the previous argument. If you are dependent financially on a
Another
foreign
country.
country that's richer than you and have more resources, your political decision is also hostage to that financial aid you are receiving. Uh, uh, I think this is what explains the madness behind. Of course, there are. I'm not saying there are no local factors like the diversion of the attention from the huge economic and political crisis in Ethiopia, but that would alone would not explain. It's only used to make it look like it is an Ethiopian agenda, but I don't think it is indeed in reality. In
Mm.
reality, they are using those agenda, all the rhetoric, nostalgic, imperialistic rhetoric to conceal the fact that they are doing that on behalf of another country. But the truth is, if they do, God forbid, and succeed, you will see that country controlling the seaports. The same is also happening in Sudan. Okay, they are the desire to control Port Sudan and create other ports in the Red Sea, that the part of Red Sea that belongs to Sudan, and also have monopoly over taking uh, gold and other minerals from Sudan is behind what is going on in Sudan. I'm not saying that domestic factors that led to the civil war, but the foreign agenda and their puppets have taken the upper hand, and they are the main actors now in the ongoing civil war in Sudan. And we are seeing the same in Ethiopia. Things may not have gone as bad as it is in Sudan, but it's slowly going down the route of, uh, of Sudan, and this is not good for our region, and this is why we should speak loudly now
Mm.
and talk as citizens of this Horn of Africa, and try to speak to stop this madness before it destroys every single country in the region.
Mm. Like you mentioned, he spoke about the UAE influence in the Horn of Africa. Uh, he also mentioned that the conflicts in the Horn of Africa and the regional organizations, as well as the African Union, ineffectiveness. He also called the rhetoric about the sea access infantile. And at the same time, he calls for regional integration. The president, the Eritrean president, calls for integration. So, is it possible while the president is saying that those organizations such as IGAD, AU, or African Union are ineffective, and calling one of the regional countries infantile, is it possible to realize to achieve a regional integration? How do you see this? How do
I think if we start with the African Union and other regional organizations, one of the main reasons why they're not effective is uh, they they're influenced by member countries who are satellite states for other countries. Um,
we're talking about Ethiopia, for example?
in our case, in the case of Corn of Africa, would be talking about IGAD, but even elsewhere in Africa, we would have similar client status that serve more the agenda of their sponsors than their own national and regional agenda. That's one factor. Another factor is how can you have an effective organization, regional organization, which is if it is funded by those very powers that are making sure that Africa remains poor. Um, that's a dilemma. So, uh, as they say, charity begins at home. If we want independence, we have to pay for it. We have to pay the price. And if we want a regional organization that reflects our collective political will and our collective enable us to follow our collective roadmap towards development, we also have to pay for the expenses. You cannot create a regional organization and expect it to work for the region if that very same organization is financed by the very powers that are denying you your independence. We have to make a decision and a very clear decision on that. Now, there are huge problems related to this distorted history, nostalgia of the past, and distorted history, and so on and so forth, that has made the Horn of Africa pay a huge price in the last 80 plus years. But that's been taken as a challenge. It should not make us blind us from seeing that the Horn of Africa is actually made to integrate and to cooperate. Okay, because it's populated by peoples who have more or less similar background, similar cultures. We will find easily across different countries people speaking the same language and more or less the same history and the same psychology. So this and also huge in natural resources if complemented. Some of them had, like Ethiopia, about eight transnational rivers, means rich in water resources. Can talk about agriculture and minerals. Some of them, like Somalia, Kenya, Eritrea, and Djibouti, also rich in minerals and also and a very long sea coast. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 4,000 kilometers would be the length of the sea coast of the current Horn of Africa. So we are also located at a very important waterway, which is the Bab el Mandeb, which links the west and the east. So if we are to use all these resources, our policies should complement each other. We would not be working for others because the others thrive in perpetual conflict in the Horn of Africa. But having said this, we have to consider these as challenges, but should not blind us from seeing the future with a clear vision. The future of the Horn of Africa lies in its cooperation and why not integration.
So the Eritrean president, is not the first time he says that the IGAD is ineffective, or AU is not is ineffective. I think it's true in some extent. Also, I believe the current chair of IGAD is belongs to Prosperity Party. At some point, he was the foreign secretary or foreign minister of Ethiopia. And being a chairperson of an independent regional organization, at the same time being a member of uh, a political organization or political party that is using all kind of rhetoric to invade other countries, is, I think, is telling. So what can be done
I
to?
think we don't need the president to tell us to know that IGAD is ineffective. Um, let's just take a few examples. A founding member of IGAD was invaded by another founding member of IGAD,
1998.
2006, and IGAD was nowhere to be seen. A founding member of IGAD was sanctioned illegally and unfairly by the very by to serve the agenda of one of another founding member of IGAD, and the organization was silent. We can see what's going on in Sudan, which is another founding member of IGAD, and we see nowhere IGAD making an effort. When it does, it do it the wrong way, either by inviting, because the finance plays its role here, either by trying to legitimize non-state actors that are working on behalf of foreign powers and undermine the legitimate government in the country, or it doesn't do anything. So either it does the wrong thing or it doesn't do anything. So there are so many reasons to show that IGAD is not only ineffective but useless. But having said that, do we need, the question remains, do we need organizations such as IGAD? Yes, we do. We just have to make it work for the Horn, not against the Horn, and not be guided by foreign powers, but guided by the very principles for which it was created. So there is a lot of work to do, but that should not take us as far as saying we don't need organizations like that, because we do need a mechanism to have a legal framework of relations between states in that part of the world. We do actually, we have to create more institutions, more mechanisms, and give it more resources and make it more effective, not destroy it.
Okay. Another thing, one of the main issues the president raised, and also we spoke about this in Tigrinya last Wednesday. So regarding engagement with the United States, the Eritrean approach, according to president's interview, the Eritrean approach is not Eritrea centered, but it's the Horn of Africa, the greater region of the Horn of Africa centered. So to those who did not listen to President Isaias' interview in Tigrinya live, to those who do not speak Tigrinya or understand Tigrinya, what does it mean? What is he's trying to achieve by saying that our engagement, our approach with the United States is not only Eritrea centered, but the Horn. It's anchored on the benefits for the whole region.
I think my understanding to that is because the whole mess the latest mess in the Horn of Africa came when the US decided that it would use anchor states across the continent to micromanage subregions of the continent. So what was happening against Eritrea in the last 25 or 30 years was part of the broader US agenda to dominate and micromanage the Horn of Africa. So if this is not revised by the US because it didn't work and it couldn't work and it created more chaos, nothing good will come. Now, this is not to mean that there are no specific Eritrean US relations to be discussed, but putting it in the broader context of the misguided US policies that have been there in the last few decennies. Eritrea was actually a victim because all the sanctions and the isolation um, and that Eritrea suffered from came to the US to serve its regional hegemony. It's not because Eritrea is Eritrea or because they don't like Eritreans, just because Eritrea happens by chance to be on the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb, and the US have always thought that they have to have the upper hand in the entire Red Sea region and the Horn of Africa region. Eritrea was made the victim, not just now, but also after the World War II. So the whole American outlook has to change, and this is what I understood. But it was not a precondition to mend diplomatic relations between the US and Eritrea.
Um, but regarding the Ethiopia and Eritrea relations, what do you think the path forward?
At the point where we're talking, I think it's very difficult to talk about the future. Ethiopia has squandered its best ever opportunity in the last 8 years to be an important part of the Horn of Africa. And not only an integral, but also an important member of the Horn of Africa with a big role to play in shaping its future. So the peace deal that was signed in 2018 in Asmara and in Jeddah would have been the foundation for a new Horn of Africa. Because once Eritrea and Ethiopia are in good terms, the rest of the Horn of Africa stand better chances of improving its interstate relations. When things go wrong between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the whole region is affected. Now, what was killed by the recent rhetoric by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was the hope that that these two countries may, and he also killed the trust that he had earned. Now, from now on, I wouldn't say Ethiopia and Eritrea would not have normal relationship, but it will be a very long time before a very the type of relationship that were initiated back in the 2018 before it comes, will go a long way because the betrayal that's felt by Eritreans and the fact that Ethiopia threatened to invade Eritrea and take Assad immediately after signing treaties with TPLF, and against a country months earlier was calling that is the country that helped Ethiopia save from disintegration and chaos. That trust to have to come back would take a long time. Having said that, I think Ethiopians themselves would change the politics of their own country, and I'm sure very soon, I hope so as well, very soon a new political order would emerge in Ethiopia. And because we are neighbors and we don't choose neighbors, we have to have one or another form of engagement with Ethiopia it may not be the same as the one that was squandered by the Ethiopian government in the last couple of years, because this has may have affected the, the way not just the government but every single Eritrean would look like at Ethiopia. Or I think the betrayal would have changed the way every single Eritrean would look at Ethiopia. So a new type of relationship may emerge, but maybe it will be a long time before the one kind of relation that we have worked for so many years and wish it to see maybe a bit too early to talk about.
So to break the chains of dependency, to create independent or sovereign institutions, and to ensure smooth integration in the region. In your view, what do you think every citizen of the Horn of Africa's role should be?
That's a quite it looks like an easy question, but I think it's a quite a difficult question. Um, uh, I think we have to think about in terms of peace first of all, because peace starts in the minds of human beings, and we have to realize that our future lies in complementarity and not in conflict, and we have to do whatever we can to influence decision makers in our respective countries, that the way to end the cycle of violence and the cycle of poverty is by working towards a more integrated and more peaceful and more stable Horn of Africa. Because if it is not cooperating, Horn of Africa will be working against each other, whether they want it or pushed by other foreign powers. So the only way to achieve internal peace and have give development a chance is to work for peace. But that peace will also gradually create collective mechanisms for the regional security and will lessen the chances of foreign powers influencing the region, and also exploiting the small differences that may exist among countries and fuel those conflicts to maximize their own agendas. So the road is not easy, but it is not impossible again, and each and every citizen have a role to play. I would say that.
Okay. Let me finish this today's episode by zooming out to look into the greater African continent. So, the president, in his interview, he mentioned something that has been mentioned for a long time: brain drain. So, his intellectuals from Africa being persuaded to go to the West instead of contributing to the African development and African progress. So, what do you think can be done to avoid any future brain drain from the continent? Let's start with that one, and then I'll follow the second point.
I think they are all interlinked, Abdu. Of course, we know that the Western countries encourage brain drain, but even if they did, if they maintain the hegemony and the current world economic order, it would make things difficult for the educated Africans to get a dignified job and have a dignified life. So the reasons for migration stems from the lack of opportunities at home. Okay, the lack of opportunities at home stems from what we have been discussing over the last hour. So okay, not having not having been able to use their own natural resources, not being able to deal with the rest of the world on mutually beneficial terms, and so on and so forth. And that gap between the needs and the available financial resource of the country makes those countries exposed to the death trap, and their politics is been hijacked by those very lending countries. So this you cannot. If the cycle is broke on one part, it will affect all the rest. So the brain drain is a symptom and not the cause. And the main cause is the neo-colonialist agenda that tries to maintain colonialism at lesser cost without deploying soldiers on the foot, soldiers on the ground, without deploying their tanks by just micromanaging the politics from afar, but maximizing what they get from those countries. Because back then in the 19th century, when they colonized Africa, the purpose was to exploit those resources. They are getting those resources without even deploying their soldiers and their tanks. So they are. This is what we call the neo-colonialists. We have to break away from the neo-colonialist agenda and ensure our independence and work together in order to be able to resist the pressure that comes from the West. But we cannot talk about only about brain drain, because it's one of the not only brain drain, even ordinary Africans who are not even educated now migrate in their thousands to the West for that same very reason, because they are unable to have a dignified life in their own countries. So all these issues are interlinked, I would say.
So another thing is, since January 2025, since President Donald J. Trump retook the White House, there has been a policy shift. The Eritrean president also mentioned that. He said the policy that in Washington seems to have unintended consequences, which is later he said a blessing in disguise. So the closure of US aid, as we all know, US aid had a huge impact and influence in Africa. So the closure of US aid and the United States also seems to limit its Africa influence in relation to what the United States has been doing before. So at the same time, the president again and again mentioned about emerging of multipolar system. So how can Africa navigate this new reality? There's a multipolar system, and there is the change of policy in the United States, which seems momentarily maybe hurting some communities in Africa, but in the long term, it will motivate Africans to look inward and to start working and innovating. So how can Africa in general navigate these new territories, and particularly East Africa?
I think we can briefly start with the changing world order. The new, which is not yet, we don't have yet the full picture, but we know that the unipolar world is quickly becoming the past. It means other polar poles are emerging, and there are strong signs to suggest that America over the past years have been constantly losing the in its competition to with China. So because America was losing and China and other countries are rising, the world is also gradually changing to a multipolar world. Now, President Donald Trump may have shut down those institutions like USAID and other institutions which are domestic, because he felt the need to minimize expenses in order to save what he's able to save in the race with China. However, the unintended consequence for Africa, I believe, is it creates the opportunity for African states who are aid dependent to seek alternative venues. And one of them is uh, working towards their own independence uh, and uh, and working with each other and taking advantage of the emerging new world order. However, they cannot take advantage of the emerging new world simply by watching it from afar. Uh, they have to strengthen their own continental and subcontinental institutions. They have to encourage um, trade exchange among the African states, and they have to devise collective policies that would help them engage other actors such as China and what's remaining from the West. Otherwise, by just siding and waiting, they may not necessarily take advantage of the emerging world order. There is a lot to be done, and unless Africans do their homework, or whatever changes come to the global world order, it might not necessarily be to the advantage of Africa, unless Africa does its homework and realizes that it is sitting on huge resources that the world need, and they have to collectively be able to negotiate new terms, whether with China or with Korea or with Japan or US or anywhere on this planet, okay, until and they have to stand in solidarity and negotiate until they come to a mutually beneficial terms, at least to terms that are not that will only benefit the buyers and not the sellers.
Okay, that's it for today, Engineer Suleiman. Thank you again for coming to the show. We will keep asking questions, raising issues, seeking solutions for the betterment of the region and the continent. Thank you again.
Yeah.